Hi, I'm John Gregg, a Westminster West resident and a member of the board of the Windmill Hill Pinnacle Association, a nonprofit group founded in 1992. We're here to celebrate and discuss a new history of the Pinnacle Association. I'm with Libby Mills and Rosalyn Shaoul, and it's really a fascinating story of a grassroots effort to save a treasured part of this part of southern Vermont. And their book, the Windmill Hill Pinnacle Association story, How Did They Get All That Land, was actually published earlier this year, but the book party to celebrate and launch it was delayed, unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're glad that you can join us for this discussion, and there'll also be a film, short film that was made in collaboration with the project that we're also pleased to share with you. So thank you, Libby and Rosalyn, for this opportunity to talk about the book. Libby, you were an early board member going back, I think, to about 1992. Tell us, what is the Pinnacle, and also how people sort of bonded and really bounded together to protect it?
Well, first of all, there are two pinnacles. The pinnacle is two things. The pinnacle is first and foremost a place, and second, the organization that's named for the place. So the place is a bump in the long ridge that runs from Grafton down to Dummerston. On the west side of town, it runs through the backside of Westminster and Putney down to Dummerston. So the pinnacle is the highest place on that ridge, actually, at 1,683 feet. No dreams of glory here.
Still a good hike, though.
It still is. It still is a little hike. And you do have to walk it. You can't drive it. So that's the place. And the place over the years had become a kind of spiritual home for Westminster West. It was a place where people went for family picnics, to celebrate graduation, to maybe have a party. That happened more than once. And also to go, I think, for darks. If you were having a bad day, you might go to the Pinnacle and feel a little bit better. So it became an important thing. It had a wonderful view out to the west, and in the old days it had a equally good view to the east, which has now grown up. So that was, and this was the problem, that to get to the Pinnacle you had to go up through a old pasture in the woods that belonged to Arthur Ranney, who was one of the old farmers, one of the early families in Putney, in Westminster West. Of course, in time, Arthur died. It was a very long time. He was an old man, one wonderful old man. And the land went to a family who did not want people to go through his land. So that became the issue, that the people in Westminster were resentful that they had lost what had come to seem a public road. It was not a public road. It was absolutely private land. So that was a little problem. So and it was about that same time. A lot of things happened in a simultaneously way. It was about that same time that Jamie Latham, who was a deeply loved and respected young guy here in West, died in a canoeing accident on the Connecticut River. Just a terrible, awful thing. So in response to that, there was an enormous community outpouring of sympathy and love. And the upshot of it was that his mom, Allison, decided that the memorial money would go to somehow finding a way to the Pinnacle. And from that incident, the Pinnacle as an organization grew. So now we have both the Pinnacle as an organization and the Pinnacle as a place. So that's a long answer to a quick question.
Yeah, well, and Jamie was one of the many people who really treasured being at the Pinnacle, which has this incredible view, as you were saying, west to Stratton. You can see the equinox. You can see, on a good day, you can see south to Greylock, and then if you're really lucky, sometimes up to Okemo and Killington.
Yeah, and the windmills.
Yeah, and the
over
windmills in
there in
Searsburg,
Reedsboro.
Vermont. So,
Yes.
so really a pretty incredible spot here in Windham County. Rosalyn, since the Pinnacle Association was founded, it's really grown. Sort of, what does it encompass now?
Well, it sure has. It encompasses more than 2,000 acres. It includes 25 miles of trails, and it goes through 5 towns. It includes Westminster and Grafton, Brookline, Rockingham, and Athens. All of those towns have parcels that are part of the Pinnacle Association lands. And it's not stopped growing now.
Interesting is there's kind of a combination. And originally, this started as trying to, preserve a place with a view and a place where people congregated. It became a big trail network, but there's also a big stewardship element to the Pinnacle too, which that potentially is part of.
That is definitely part of that.
Yes.
Certainly.
Yeah, and it's really quite a network of trails. What prompted the book?
Well, the idea started back in 2017. In spring of that year, Libby and I were regular walkers on the Wednesday walks on the Pinnacle trails. And as we'd walk, I'd ask her, Libby, how did they get this land? And she'd tell me a wonderful story, evocative story about the human interest involved in acquiring the different parcels. And so she was also concerned that this history be preserved. And so we got the idea together to perhaps do an oral history of the acquisitions. And we agreed that we would work on this together, and we began by interviewing some of the early founders, Allison Latham, the Westings, Arthur and Carol Westing, Randy and Beverly Major, and Libby herself. And we did oral interviews, and we recorded them, and we transcribed them. And as we listened to the recordings, we thought, well, there are still a lot of questions here. How did the land originally end up belonging to one or the other? So we began to do research at the Westminster Town Hall, and we began to ask many more people about their involvement. And it started to grow to such a point that we said, this is not an oral history, this is a book. And if it's a book, then it's got to have maps, it's got to have photographs, it's got to have some artwork to bring interest. And so it grew, and we got to find out that there were wonderful maps that we could use by Andy, by Jeff Nugent, there was Arthur Westing had so many photographs. Camille Roberts had beautiful artworks, and all this became incorporated into it, and it was definitely a book by that time. And in addition, we realized that we can't just talk about the acquisitions by the founders, we have to talk about more recent acquisitions. So we embarked on a whole new set of interviews of some of the current leadership in 2018 and 19, and that became part of it as well.
Yeah. What surprised you both as you were working on the book and researching it?
Well, I think once we started the research at the town hall, we were able to go back to 1940 to find out that the land was originally the Dunham Farm, and there was someone called Roland Ranney who had given the land to Arthur Ranney, and then eventually it was auctioned and it was bought by another family, the Littmans, and so we began to follow the trail that way. And one of the big surprises for me was finally finding out the story from the Littman point of view. I was able to talk to Elizabeth Littman, and she told me how they had come here having loved Vermont and bought this land without having any idea that it was adjoining a famous spiritual headquarters for the local people. And so they bought it and they started to camp on it. They had plans to build on it, and they discovered that they were considered to be intruders, and they were intruded upon by many, including lots of young people that would come late at night and pick up trucks ready for a party and leave a lot of trash behind and disturb their young children who were camping with them. So they began to wonder how they were going to survive this. They thought, well, maybe if we own the Pinnacle, then they can't do this. So having bought the land adjoining it in 1985, in 1987 they actually bought the land with the Pinnacle. By that time, the farms weren't using it anymore, and they bought it with the cabin and all, and now they truly controlled that whole piece of land. But they also began to realize more and more how important it was to the people of Westminster. And so they began to talk to them and try and figure out how they could allow the pinnacle to be reached in a way that would not disturb them. And eventually there was a success in that venture, and by 1997 they were able to sell a big portion of land and donate. They actually donated the pinnacle, which they had bought at their own expense, so that the community could have access.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting part of this whole story because, you know, with Vermont and other states, there's always a concern about people from away coming in and buying land and then posting it. And here there was a really good compromise and agreement worked out that has really sort of served everyone's purposes. You mentioned maps. I'm a map guy, and there are a lot of good ones in the book. Why are they important?
Well, I think it's important because the lands were not bought in any sequential order. One was here, one was there, one was south, one was north. And if you read the stories, it's hard to follow without having a map. And luckily, Andy Tepfer had made a fantastic parcel map, which he allowed us to use. And we broke it down and we put a piece of it with every story so people knew exactly which part of the trail that we were talking about.
The other maps in the book are done by Jeff Nugent, and those are very useful. Jeff is a big hiker and has done maps he works for the Wyndham Regional, so his maps are also professional. The two of them have I think they really gave the structure to the book.
Yeah, we were very appreciative
the
that
whole piece comes alive with the maps.
Yeah. Are there also, as both from your service on the board and then in doing this book, I mean, there's some lessons here about community involvement and stewardship, right?
Oh my goodness!
What would you tell people about that?
Oh my goodness! It's just there isn't time enough in the day to talk about the amount of community involvement in the Pinnacle. It's just built on thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of volunteer work, and I mean, the acquisitions. It takes the professional people, the foresters, the surveyors, the grant writers, the filmmakers. And it was just incredible how people came together around this idea. It was, of course, because the place is so compelling, and they loved it, and they really, having lost it for a little while, maybe it probably became more important for people to contribute. But and I should say the money came in too. It was the parcels for the most part were bought, and they were bought by donations, by grants. Lots and lots of support from the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. Steady support from the Vermont Land Trust. Just tremendous support from all quarters. It's been very moving for me to see how people can come together and work on something when there's a clear vision that serves so many people in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, the towns that this encompasses, the Pinnacle Trails encompass, are very small towns: Westminster, Athens, Brookline, Rockingham. So it's.
But we work in collaboration with other groups, and now the Pinnacle works closely with the Putney Mountain Association, which has conserved the southern part of the ridge. The Pinnacle has also spawned two little side groups, one in Bald Hill, the wonderful peak that looks right down on Harlow's farm and across the river to Fall Mountain, and just a spectacular little view of the village of Bellows Falls, just charming. And also over in Grafton, where the trail now ends, the Athens Dome group has worked to conserve, I don't know how many acres, but it's beautiful land, wonderful trails. It just grows, keeps on growing. So now the trail goes from the collaboration of all those groups means that you can walk on marked, beautifully maintained trails from almost the Dummerston town line to the western boundary of western boundary of Pinnacle land in Grafton. Good trip.
Yeah. Well, and it's a great book, the Windmill Hill Pinnacle Association story. How did they get all that land? I've been pleased to be able to pass it along and give copies to some family members who've enjoyed the Pinnacle Trails over the years. Now, as part of the book project, there also was you co-produced, both of you, a 16-minute film about the history of the Pinnacle with Wendy Wallas, and that includes footage from 1997 and the dedication of the Jamie Latham Trail. And tell us a little bit about how that came to be, and then we're going to be pleased to be able to share that.
Well, it happened that Wendy Wallas was also an avid hiker, and she hiked with us on Wednesdays, and we began to talk about our work, and she was a budding videographer, and she said, well, I'd love to film some of these founders of this organization. And so she began filming interviews with the majors, with Ellen Zimmerman and others, and it was turning out that it was a wonderful accompaniment, and she agreed to edit it in time for our book launches, and the edit was beautiful, and we were all ready to show it at our book launches, which had to be postponed due to the pandemic. So we didn't. It's been on hold until today, and now it's also a wonderful time to share it, and I think Libby can best explain why this is an apt time to share it in the history of this organization.
It was an apt time to do the film because it was just in the year before three of the founders and one of the stalwarts died. It was we were able to capture Bev Major, Ellen Zimmerman, Bob Haas,
Arthur Westing.
And Arthur Westing.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure to be able to talk to you both about this book, and we hope that you all now will enjoy the world premiere, so to speak, of the film that Libby and Rosalyn have co-produced with Wendy Wallas.
The whole thing started in a sad way. In 1991, Jamie had graduated from college and had 2 Italian friends, and he wanted to take them down the Connecticut River. Allison raced over here and said, "They've called me from Windsor. I've got to get to Windsor. Something's wrong." We went up to Windsor and we're trying to help Allison, and eventually she found out that Jamie had drowned.
He had on him boots, and they filled with water, and they pulled him down and he drowned.
We had the memorial service. The church was full, crammed.
When my son died, we created an obituary that said people could make donations to a fund that would be used to help the environment. It was kind of vague at that time, but it so describes the Pinnacle without knowing it was going to be the Pinnacle.
You know, it was obvious that the Pinnacle was very important for him. I felt we ought to do something, you know, that was substantial and would really mean something to the community and keep the memory of Jamie alive.
Well, right after Jamie died, I had, I would say, energy or something, and I had to do something with it. And so there was the Pinnacle.
We all put it together and said that we should do try to save the Pinnacle in Jamie's name.
I just remember talking to Bev about what project we could do, and And Jamie loved the Pinnacle, so we settled on the Pinnacle right away.
We were able to, in 1996, actually have the Lippmans then give us, and they gave us the Pinnacle. They just gave it to us. I mean, they did not ask us to pay for it. We got it. Because they learned over the years, and they realized over the years, that this land really wasn't theirs, and you can't buy a piece of land that was public and had been public for years and years and years. As it says right here in the newsletter, this idea initially developed as a possible use of the Jamie Latham Memorial Fund, which was established at the time of his death. Since Jamie had a great love of the outdoors, the Pinnacle was one of his favorite places.
I just want to say that this whole thing started 6 years ago, almost exactly 6 years ago. But for the first 3 years, we really struggled along and didn't accomplish much of anything. Then 3 years ago, there were a small group of us sitting in the Littman's kitchen, and Jonas suggested, well, maybe there might be a way from the north, which we'd never thought of before. And so we proceeded to investigate the north, mainly Allison proceeded to investigate the north. And as she did, she found this particular piece of property, which is 171 acres, and she bought it. And held it for us until we could buy it. And that is what made this trail possible. Now, when I cut the ribbon, which I'm going to do right now, my biggest thank you is to Jamie. And in his memory, this trail is.
Oh, boy.
One of the things that I've been privileged to do is to work on this project and work with the Pinnacle Association to initiate what I think could be one of the regions, not the state, but one of the region's most outstanding conservation projects. 405 or 415 acres, and that's now protected forever until the world blows up, essentially, in perpetuity, as a public wildlife reserve and ridgeline trail. That is something that's extraordinary for a small community.
So there were mountains here about 400 million years ago. We were in the tropics. Then a lot of rain fell in 400 million years. The mountains eroded away. Dinosaurs came and went. 20,000 years ago, there was a huge ice sheet a mile thick that stole our topsoil and dumped it in Long Island. 13,000 years ago, the ice melted back. 10,000 years ago, the trees came. About that time, the people came. 300 years ago, the European settlers are here. Sheep was farmed here. What little soil that the glacier had left, a lot of it was taken away by the sheep that eroded away the vegetation. And here we are today, standing 1,000 feet above sea level on hard rock on what had started out as deep ocean muds.
Well, to look around up here, you would say that nothing ever happened here. I mean, people couldn't have lived up here, but they did. So if you go down over the hill here, more 200-300 yards due east of here, and we found a cellar hole last spring when we came up here with the Vermont Land Trust. I'm pretty sure that would have been Stephen Holden's house, and I believe that he had a son who was either north or due south of him, so there should be another cellar hole right down over the hill here. There was a lime kiln down on the Goodale land, which is not it's probably maybe a half a mile as the crow flies from here, where they made lime basically for it was mostly for local use, fertilizer and mortar. There's a cemetery on the north end of what we hope to eventually be part of our trail up towards Bemis Hill. Is an old cemetery called the North Cemetery. Supposedly there was a windmill just down below here, very close to the Putney line. Supposedly that was Charles Holden's windmill, and it was still operating in 1810. I could go on and on. There's a lot of stuff. There was a lot happened up here along this whole ridgeline. You get down on the Banning Road in Putney, and there are all kinds of cellar holes. So that's it.
Let us toast our achievement. The dream become reality. The pinnacle is protected. A trail to the pinnacle created and protected. And the beginnings of a wildlife corridor established. We are here. This is ours. This will be theirs who come after us. Supportive members, endlessly toiling trustees, initiator, enabler, visionary, grant finder, generous donors, all of you. Rocks, soil, trees, flora, fauna, vista, the pinnacle. We salute you.
The top of the pinnacle was a destination for people from town going on picnics. The school class used to go up there once a year. 4-H group sometimes would have a big meeting up there, that sort of thing. And so people in the town were well aware of it, and it was important to them.
There was a teacher, Claire Oglesby. She taught 1st and 2nd grade in the little Westminster West schoolhouse, and she used to take her students there every year.
I think it was in 1st grade when I went to the Westminster West School. We would go up there and we would hike on up. We would write about what we saw in journals when we got to the top, and we would see all sorts of nature stuff up on the way and learn about nature. If we saw something that we wanted to write down, we would write about it.
And she, for some reason, was a very magical teacher. Everybody really enjoyed her, so she had a lot of influence on what kids did.
Instead of hearing about, oh, this is what happens in a classroom and reading about it, we got to go out and see it ourselves, which was pretty cool and actually made it easier to understand because you could actually see it. I think it's good that we are preserving and making these trails. I think it's really good.
Our vision was that it was just going to be, a trail up to the pinnacle and the pinnacle. We didn't imagine that it was going to be 2,000 acres going through 5 or 6 towns.
The big push was for recreational trails for access and for trails for fun. And it's true that the wildlife habitat was important, but with climate change, the focus has shifted enormously, so that now we're thinking about connectivity. And the growth, instead of being just growth for having a trail that goes from point A to point B, for people, it's for point A to point B, for bears, for deer, for
moose,
for small animals to move as climate requires them to move for their own survival. Mm-hmm. It's a huge difference and a big growth. A response to the times.
I never really ever expected us to get any beyond just getting to the pinnacle, but it kept coming. There was something going on at that time, that things would just fall into place.
As though the fates were just on our side.
They did.
It was that people had pieces of land that had been in one family for a long time were available because the families were tired of paying the taxes, and these pieces were just available.
Yes, everything worked out. It really had, like God had his hand on it.
Our favorite line when we were applying to VHCB for money is that the Pinnacle was a small state park run on volunteer labor. They must have liked that because they kept on contributing and still do.
So I think the most meaningful thing that I have ever done in my life, aside from teaching and the family, which are also like the most meaningful things.
For the people who are inspired by the Pinnacle, I would say go and do the same and find a place where find the need and know it's important, stick with it. Don't be discouraged. Be sure of your steps, work with others, collaborate, stick with the vision.
If they have a dream that is worth it, that is important to them, talk with others, see if you can put together a vision of what you want, of what you feel there ought to be, and go for it.
I hope for the future that we get this trail from Bald Hill all the way out to the Pinnacle.
Please take care of it and help it to continue and grow.
Just follow the rules, keep it clean, don't trash it.
I would like you to leave it as you find it. Don't leave anything behind.
You go in and look and see and enjoy and maybe take a picture with your camera, but don't remove.
Just remember that we're here for a little short time and we have to steward what we live on.
Bring your grandchildren. I think that's important that we have keep having young generations come.
It's just very important for the health and well-being of this part of the world.
Use your eyes. Use your camera. Enjoy.
But do take care of it.
We don't think we own it. We only take care of it for a while. There's a pretty obvious bump. That's Goddard Hill. That's bigger and more distinct. And then it rises to Bemis Hill, which is the northernmost peak of the ridge of Windmill Mountain. So you go down from Bemis Hill bump by bump by bump by bump. One of those bumps will be Paul's Ledges, or the backside of Paul's Ledges. One of the bumps will be the hill where Doug Avery lives, or his house. Then you'll go along and the Pinnacle will come up. You can just look from the top of Bemis Hill and keep looking right down in that direction, and as far as you can see, that whole ridge is conserved, so it's going to look just about the way it looks right now for the foreseeable future. We won't say in perpetuity, we'll just say for the foreseeable future.
Thanks again. I was lucky to be there in 1997 for the dedication of that Jamie Latham Trail, and it's wonderful to be able to celebrate and discuss this book and video. We hope you've enjoyed it.